And so tonight, the future of Prescott Industrial begins. My Uncle Victor said those words into a microphone he had no right to hold. To 340 people who believed him. A waiter was mid-pour when I opened the ballroom doors. I watched the champagne reach the rim of the glass and stop, because the waiter had stopped. Because everyone near the entrance had turned to look at the woman nobody had invited. Victor saw me last. That was always his problem. He noticed the room before he noticed the truth standing in it. I didn't raise my voice. I have never once in my life needed to. I said only, "You should have read past Article 7. I don't think most of the room heard me. But he did. The colour left his face. The way water leaves a sink. Slow at first. Then all at once. He set the microphone down as if it had grown heavy. Somewhere behind me, a woman laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with any of this, and the sound of it hung in the air like something out of place. That was a Tuesday in November. I was 34 years old, and I was wearing a dress with no jewellery, and I was calmer than I had been in 2 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how one signature ended everything, you have to go back 26 months, to a hospital corridor that smelled like floor wax and grief, and to the 4 hours it took my uncle to arrive. My father, Raymond Prescott, spent 9 days in the ICU before he died. I was there for all 9. I counted them the way you count anything when you have no power over the outcome. Carefully, and for no reason. Victor arrived 4 hours after the death. Not before. He came in a good coat, smelling of the outside, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said the right words in the right order. I remember thinking that a man who is never late to a board meeting is never accidentally 4 hours late to his brother's deathbed. He simply hadn't seen a reason to hurry. I was 32. 6 weeks later, Victor called a board vote. My title, Vice President of Compliance, was, in his word, restructured. They offered me a consulting role instead. It came with a decent number and no authority whatsoever, which is a very expensive way of telling someone to disappear quietly. I wasn't in the room for the vote. Margaret Osei called me that evening and told me what he'd said to justify it. That I was too emotional to lead right now. Margaret had been the company's corporate secretary for 23 years, and her voice shook when she repeated it. Mine didn't. I packed my father's office into 3 cardboard boxes myself. Pens, a photograph, a leather binder I set on top without opening, because opening it felt like admitting he was gone. I left those boxes stacked in my guest room for 61 days. I wish I could say I was being strategic. I was just trying to breathe. Like, dislike. On the 61st day, I opened the boxes because I needed the guest room, which is the kind of ordinary reason that changes a life. The leather binder was my father's personal copy of the original company charter, dated 1986, the year he and Victor built the thing out of nothing. His annotations were everywhere, in the margins, in the blank spaces, in that small deliberate handwriting I would have known anywhere. He had underlined things. He had left himself notes I would never get to ask him about. I found Article 9.4 near the back. It said that any merger or acquisition exceeding 30% of the company's assessed value required the signed consent of all Class A shareholders. Everyone. Not a majority. All of them. My father had underlined the word all twice. I read it once and didn't understand why my hands had gone cold. I read it a second time, then a third. Slowly, the way you reread a sentence in a letter that changes what you thought you knew about someone. Because when my father died, his Class A shares hadn't gone to the company, they'd come to me. I called an attorney the next morning. Not the company's. My own. She confirmed all 3 things I needed confirmed. That the article was still enforceable. That my inherited shares activated it. And that, in her experience, a man like Victor had almost certainly never read that far. I did nothing for 3 weeks. I had a lever, but no proof he'd earned the pulling of it. Not yet. That changed on a Wednesday in March, with a single, forwarded email. The email came from Margaret, forwarded from her personal account, the one nobody at the company thought to monitor. It was an internal memo. Victor was fast-tracking a merger with a firm called Halcyon Group. The number in the memo was $220 million. I spent that weekend doing what I had done for a living. I read. Halcyon was clean on the surface. 1 layer down. Less so. 3 shell companies deep. Through an entity registered in the Cayman Islands. I found a name I recognized. Victor's. He held a 19% equity stake in the very company he was selling ours to. He would sit on both sides of the table and collect from both. It was a related party transaction, undisclosed, and I had spent my whole career learning the plain word for that: fraud. But that wasn't the part that made me sit very still. The merger required a filing with the SEC. That filing required the consent of all Class A shareholders because of Article 9.4. Victor's legal team hadn't flagged it. They were leaning on a 2004 amendment to the bylaws, something they believed had quietly replaced the old charter. My attorney read it twice and told me they were wrong. An amendment to the bylaws cannot override the founding charter. The old articles still held, which meant the entire $220 million deal rested on one signature that was legally mine to give. And Victor, sooner or later, would either forge it or insist he didn't need it. He needed my name on one piece of paper, and he was never going to get it. I could have gone to Victor, confronted him, waved the charter, demanded he stop. That is what he would have expected. And expecting it, he would have found a way around me. So I didn't. I went to the Securities and Exchange Commission instead. The enforcement attorney assigned to me was named David Chen. He was 42, careful, and he did not once tell me to calm down, which I appreciated more than I can explain. Over 2 meetings, I gave him 94 pages. The charter, the Cayman filings, the shell structure with Victor's name at the bottom of it, the memo, everything I had spent my career learning how to assemble, turned now on the man who had called me too emotional to lead. I signed my whistleblower affidavit on a Thursday morning. One signature. The notary stamped it at 9:07 a.m. And I remember looking at that time and thinking how strange it was that the whole thing turned on my name going onto paper, just never the paper Victor wanted. Chen told me the commission would issue a cease and desist. He couldn't promise when. That part, he said, was theirs to decide. I asked him for one thing only. The company's 40th anniversary gala was 6 weeks out. Victor planned to announce the merger there, to the whole room. I asked if the order could arrive then. He didn't answer. He just wrote it down. Afterward, I bought a dress, charcoal grey, plain, no jewellery, November 14th. 340 guests, 1 cease and desist, and a dress with no jewellery, like dislike. The ballroom held 340 people, and every one of them was watching Victor when I arrived. The future of Prescott Industrial begins tonight, he was saying. A waiter froze mid-pour. The room turned toward the doors before my uncle did. He recovered well. He always did. Elaine, he said into the microphone, warm, magnanimous. Glad you could make it. I didn't answer him. I have learned that not answering a man like Victor takes more from him than any reply could. I crossed the room to the head table, where the board chair sat with his fork halfway to his mouth, and I set a plain manila envelope beside his plate. You'll want to read Article 9.4, I said, quietly enough, that only our end of the table heard it, and the Commission's position on the Halcyon filing. He opened it. I watched him read the first page, and then read it again, the way I once had. Behind me, 2 people came in through the service door. I didn't turn to look. I already knew. They were not dressed for a gala. They walked to the stage, and one of them handed Victor a single folded document and said something I couldn't hear and didn't need to. The room went silent. 340 people, and not one of them moved. I have never heard a quiet like it, before or since. Victor looked up from the paper. He found me in the crowd. He said my name once. Just once. The way you say a word you finally understand too late. I walked out the way I walked in. Alone. But this time, 340 people knew exactly who I was. Like dislike. Victor was removed as CEO 11 days later. The board didn't debate it long. The SEC investigation is still open, the kind of thing that moves slowly and thoroughly. And the Halcyon merger simply ceased to exist, voided by the one signature it never had. The board asked me to take his chair. I said no. I could see them not understanding it. These people who measured everything in titles and value. But I had watched what that chair did to my uncle, how it convinced him that the company was owed to him, rather than held in his trust. I took a board seat instead. I told them plainly, I'm not my father, but I'm not my uncle either. It was the truest thing I knew about myself. And it was enough. My father's old office had sat empty since he died. Victor never wanted it. Too many photographs, too much of Raymond in the walls. I turned it into a conference room and put his name on the door. The leather binder is on a shelf in there now. The 1986 charter, with all his notes still inside it. Sometimes, before a meeting, I take it down and open it to Article 9.4, to the word he underlined twice, and I sit with it a moment before the others arrive. His handwriting is still in the margins. Some things hold longer than the people who wrote them.